Hello, everyone. My name is Chazz Upton. I'm part of Group 2, and we will be teaching you guys about the research method of questionnaires today. So, the basic definition of a questionnaire is something that collects information on a topic. That's the generalized definition of what it is. The point of a questionnaire is to really gather large amounts of information at once. So, you take in a large amount of data, and then you can use a lot of statistics and analysis to sort it all into a conclusion of what you are looking for, what you are trying to research. Now, because of that, traditionally, questionnaires are more quantitatively based, meaning they're based on numbers or on the same answers over and over again to very close ended questions. And therefore, they give you a very statistical analysis of what you are asking people. However, there is a potential for a questionnaire to be more qualitative. For that to happen, the questions that you need to be asking are based heavily on open ended questions. Now, because of that, although it's more interpretive to your study, it does require a little bit more work on the analysis part to figure out how everyone is answering the question. So it gives you a wider range of answers and potentially more quality in answers. However, it does take a lot more work to be able to sort through and understand what everyone says. Now, as Peter begins our next section, he's going to begin our annotated checklist for how you conduct a questionnaire, what you should be using and applying, and then Kyler is going to wrap that up with some design questions about questionnaires.
Thanks, Chaz, for opening up our time. Now, before collecting data for research, we must examine and consider two common pitfalls to avoid falling into. The first, because questionnaires are the most commonly used research method, people can often misunderstand research to just be about conducting surveys. Therefore, instead of exploring other methods that are available that could potentially be better suited for their specific question of research, they would automatically turn to this questionnaire method, which could maybe result in a waste of time and an unnecessary collecting of data that isn't relevant or related to the research question. Another potential pitfall is how people naturally lean toward their previous experiences and use of a specific method, that they resort to that same method before even considering other possibilities. Again, it can be beneficial to your current research question to consider an experiment with new methods that could work better for you, rather than relying on what you think might work based off of a previous experience in a different context even. Now, once your research question has been established, it's important to identify the sample population that will help you get the results for your research. The first thing to do is to locate and to establish a connection with your target group. To accomplish this, there are some helpful questions to ask, like how large and what kind of representation would you want from your sample? How will communication with the group take place, whether through email, through texting, through phone calls? How are you going to have contact and dialogue with your group? And thirdly, are there specific people that will help gain access to just a greater population or organization? Now, these questions will help form necessary dialogue again with the group, as well as to seek consent with the members and the participants and even people in authority, which is also an important matter to be mindful of. Now, once the sample population has been identified, the next step of the questionnaire design is to narrow down the theme of the research that will be explored. Here, various methods can be used, such as focus groups, initial interviews, and documentary analysis. And Kyler will share a little bit more about the design of the questionnaire.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, when design our questionnaire, we really should start with a clear statement that explains the purpose of our research, the purpose why we're even doing a questionnaire in the first place. Also, would want to include an address or a date for return, maybe the policy that we would have for confidentiality, as well as ways to contact the researcher in case someone had a question. I think, though, the most key aspect of designing a questionnaire is that people are giving up their free time to complete this survey. So we want to keep the questionnaire as specific and engaging as possible. And one way to do that is by having clear instructions for them to use while completing it. Also, when we are designing our questionnaire, we want to think of the type of questions we want to ask. There's a number of different types of questions we could use. We could use closed questions. We could use multiple choice or ranking questions. or even open-ended questions where people can respond with longer answers. But one consideration when designing questions is to maybe start our questionnaire with more generic questions and save for personal information for the end of the survey. Some people get turned off if they have to start right in with giving up personal information in that questionnaire. Important part of design is also to pilot our questionnaire. Many times a questionnaire is not going to be ready to go at first draft. We want to maybe pilot that draft so that we can find any type of misunderstandings or maybe confusing instructions ahead of time. Also, to maybe understand the length of time it would take for someone to finish the questionnaire. Often we want to limit that time of 20 minutes or less for each of our questionnaires. Piloting this ahead of time will give us a better understanding and idea of how long it would really take someone to complete it. Also consider using an electronic questionnaire. These are becoming much more common nowadays. Helps the speed of getting responses back, also compiling those responses, and tends to be at a little bit lower cost than mailing questionnaires out. What to consider during the questionnaire? Maybe have a cover letter that goes out with your questionnaire. This would help motivate respondents. Also, maybe in that can outline our confidentiality policy, and then have a prepaid envelope to go along with it. That way people aren't put out when responding to your questionnaire, that they are able just to turn it back in easy as can be. This will help us also get a lot more questionnaires returned to us, higher response, more data. After our distribution, we really want to talk about the resources available to now analyze all this data we've collected. In fact, there are a number of different computer softwares that can help support this analyst. But most important, when we are looking at our data, we want to make sure that we are keeping first and foremost the reason behind our questionnaire. What was the research question we were trying to answer? And then last, we also need to be aware that questionnaires do have limitations. In fact, we could end up collecting more data than we could effectively use, or maybe we were getting more descriptive rather than explaining with the questions we were asking. So always be mindful that questionnaires aren't perfect. There are downfalls, and we need to be aware of those limitations. Hope this helped understanding better of questionnaires and their effectiveness.
Well, thanks, Peter and Kyler, for your input into questionnaires. We're going to wrap this discussion up with the criticisms of questionnaires because, frankly, no system is perfect and there are some drawbacks to questionnaires. So the first one we have is that questionnaires can have the risk of collecting too much data and then it just becomes useless. So there can be a lot more gathered than you might expect. Another issue is that questionnaires, because they tend to be statistical, they tend to show something rather than explain why it's happening. So the relationship between things, instead of having a true causation, it might just be a lot of data and it won't truly explain why it's happening. A third criticism is that questionnaires can be unexpectedly timely, which means that if you're not prepared for how much actual work and effort goes into a questionnaire, you can fall pretty far behind because they tend to take a lot more effort than people might realize. And lastly, as Cameron and Deuce say, there is the element of literacy issues. Some people tend to just talk more easily than they write. And so their answers, while they may be giving their best, it may just not be exactly what you are looking for. And so really the solution to the questionnaire criticisms is that you just need to use a mixed method approach. Questionnaires are great, but you can't rely solely on them. You need to be able to use other methods, such as observation and focus groups and all the other ones that Cameron and Deuce discuss. Using all of these methods will put you in a better place with a lot more information than just a questionnaire will provide. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I hope you all learned a lot about questionnaires.